Daniel Cross believed the war had shown him humanity's darkest depths, but the discovery at his fence line that bitter Wyoming dawn shattered that assumption. The rope marks carved into her wrists spoke of horrors he wished he could deny. A 16-year-old girl, lifeless and forsaken like abandoned cattle along his property boundary. Her torn garments and parched lips revealed she'd endured the night's freezing temperatures, morning ice crystals settling across her raven hair. Daniel dropped to his knees, his calloused hands shaking as he severed the bindings. 2 decades of isolated existence on this homestead. And now this nightmare. The child awakened as her restraints loosened, her eyes blazing with the terror of a trapped creature. She retreated frantically, her parched voice rasping, "Stay away from me." Daniel had already witnessed the bruising along her arms, observed how she protected her injured ribs. Someone had brutalized this young woman before discarding her. His expression hardened as he identified the warning signs he'd desperately tried to erase from his own past. "Calm yourself," he murmured, maintaining distance. "I mean you no harm." She examined his weathered features, seeking deception. Daniel Cross possessed an imposing frame, enlarged by 20 years of ranch labor, yet something within his steel-gray gaze must have reassured her. She remained motionless. "What do they call you?" he inquired. "Clara," she whispered like sharing a secret. Daniel observed the severed rope in his grasp, then noticed the wagon tracks departing his fence. Someone had transported her here under darkness and abandoned her to perish. In this Wyoming wilderness, that guaranteed wolves, exposure, or worse fates. Who committed this atrocity? Clara's expression became vacant. Not bewilderment from forgotten memories, but the calculated emptiness of someone haunted by too much recollection. "My father," she breathed. Those words struck Daniel like a physical assault. He'd spent 20 years fleeing his own father's legacy, and now it gazed back through this girl's tormented eyes. Daniel rose deliberately, his thoughts racing. He could escort her to town, deliver her to the sheriff. That represented the sensible choice, the secure option. But Sheriff Rodriguez served corporate interests, asking minimal questions regarding family disputes, and Clara would return to whoever had inflicted this damage. Or face something worse. "Are you capable of walking?" he asked. Clara nodded, struggling upright. Daniel watched her rise, noting how she carried herself like someone anticipating another beating. He reached his decision. "Come along then, let's get you sheltered." Yet as they approached his cabin, Daniel spotted dust clouds forming on the horizon. Someone approached rapidly, and instinct warned him they brought nothing but trouble. The distant dust remained miles away, but Daniel had mastered reading the plains like scholars read literature. 3 horsemen, advancing with the urgency of men pursuing a mission. He possessed perhaps 20 minutes before they arrived at his land. Within the cabin, Clara sat tensely at his kitchen table, her gaze flickering toward the entrance repeatedly. Daniel filled water from his pitcher into a metal cup and placed it before her. "Sip carefully," he instructed. She complied, though her trembling hands caused the cup to rattle against her teeth. Daniel recognized that particular terror. He'd witnessed it reflecting back from mirrors each morning during his first decade after escaping home. "Those approaching riders," he said quietly. "Do they concern you?" Clara's cup halted midway to her lips. Her facial expression revealed everything Daniel needed to understand. "He's returning for me," she whispered. Daniel moved toward the window, studying the advancing dust cloud. "Your father." "I represented payment for his obligations." Clara's voice barely registered. Then he reconsidered. "Claimed I lacked sufficient value. That I would disgrace whoever accepted me." The words impacted Daniel like thrown rocks. He recalled his own father's voice, whisker-slurred, explaining how children were burdens that intelligent men learned to abandon. "So he bound you to my fence to die?" Clara confirmed with a nod. "Said the wolves would eliminate his error." Daniel felt something frigid settle within his chest. Not fear, but the familiar weight of a decision destined to alter everything. He'd spent 20 years avoiding precisely this variety of conflict, maintaining anonymity, minding his own affairs. But observing Clara, recognizing his own childhood reflected in her terrified eyes, he understood his running days had ended. "Well," he said, examining his rifle mounted above the fireplace. "Appears your father miscalculated." Clara stood so abruptly her chair crashed backward. "You don't comprehend. He's not alone. He owes money to dangerous individuals, and they're accompanying him." Daniel turned from the window. "How dangerous?" "The variety that incinerate farms and avoid questions." The dust cloud had approached closer. Daniel could distinguish individual riders. 3 men, riding hard, and one led a rope dragging something behind his horse. Daniel's blood chilled. It was a message intended for him. They'd slaughtered his cattle, dragged the carcass as a warning. "They want you understanding what befalls people who interfere," Clara said, interpreting his expression. Daniel approached his gun cabinet and retrieved his Winchester. 20 years of tranquility on this ranch. Now it was concluding because he couldn't abandon a child in distress. But as he loaded the rifle, Daniel realized something that surprised him. For the first time in 2 decades, he felt authentic again. "Clara," he said, his voice steady, "do you know how to shoot?" She shook her head. "Then you're about to learn." The 3 riders halted just beyond rifle range. Close enough for Daniel to observe their faces, yet distant enough to avoid his bullets. Intelligent men, experienced in this work. The central figure was stocky with graying hair and clothing that had witnessed too many saloons. That must be Clara's father. The other 2 were younger, harder, with the cold eyes of men who killed for payment. "Cross," the older man shouted. "I know you have my daughter inside." Daniel stepped onto his porch, Winchester ready. Clara was positioned at the rear window with his old Colt, her hands steadier now that she had something besides fear to occupy her. "She's no longer your daughter," Daniel called back. "You forfeited that privilege when you tied her to a fence." The man's laughter was repulsive. "That little wretch belongs to me until I decide otherwise. Hand her over and we'll consider it settled." Daniel felt his finger tighten on the trigger, but he forced himself to remain calm. These weren't random drifters. They possessed the confidence of men backed by genuine power. "For whom are you working?" Daniel asked. One of the younger men responded. "Vincent Blackwood sends his regards." Daniel's blood turned to ice. Every rancher within 100 miles knew that name. Blackwood owned half the territory through fear and the other half through bullets. If Clara's father owed Blackwood money, this wasn't simply about a runaway girl anymore. "Blackwood wants his property returned," the man continued. "The girl was collateral on a debt. Her daddy here decided to dispose of the merchandise instead of paying up." Clara's father shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "She ain't worth what he was demanding." "Damaged goods." "That's for Mr. Blackwood to decide," the gunman said coldly. "But he's willing to be reasonable. Hand over the girl, and Cross here can keep his ranch. Hell, he can even keep breathing." Daniel looked back toward the cabin window where Clara waited. She was 16 years old, and these men were discussing her like livestock. Collateral, property, damaged goods, the same words his own father had used. "And if I refuse?" Daniel asked. The lead gunman smiled. "Well, then we take the girl anyway, and you become another tragic story about what happens to folks who interfere with Mr. Blackwood's business." Daniel glanced at the dead cattle they'd dragged to his fence line. The message was clear. Blackwood had resources, men, and a reputation that had kept this territory in line for 5 years. But as Daniel looked at those 3 riders, he realized something important. They were here talking instead of shooting. That meant Blackwood wanted to avoid trouble, at least for now. "I need time to consider," Daniel called out. "You have 1 hour," the gunman replied. "Then we come calling, and we won't be asking politely." As the riders pulled back to wait, Daniel felt Clara's presence behind him. "There's something additional," she whispered. "Something I didn't tell you about Blackwood." Daniel turned, and the look in her eyes told him everything was about to become much worse. Daniel closed the cabin door behind them, his mind racing. Whatever Clara was about to reveal, she didn't want those men outside to hear it. "Blackwood isn't just collecting a debt," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's my biological father." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, trying to process what she'd just revealed. The man outside, the one who tied you to the fence. My stepfather, William Tucker. He married my mother when I was small. After. Clara's voice broke. After Blackwood threw us out. Daniel felt pieces clicking into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. Blackwood abandoned you and your mother? Worse. When I turned 16 last month, he decided he wanted me back. Not as a daughter. Clara's hands clenched into fists. William owed Blackwood money from a poker game. Blackwood offered to forgive the debt in exchange for me. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd known men like Blackwood during the war. Powerful men who took whatever they wanted and called it business. But William got scared, Clara continued. Said if Blackwood discovered what kind of man he really was, what he'd been doing to me all these years, Blackwood would kill him for damaging his property. The room went dead quiet. Daniel understood now why Clara had that look in her eyes, why she flinched at sudden movements. William Tucker wasn't just a coward who'd abandoned a child. He was a monster who'd been hurting her for years. So instead of facing Blackwood's anger, he decided to let you die. Clara nodded. Make it appear like I ran away and got killed by wolves. Then he could tell Blackwood I was already dead when the debt came due. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. The 3 riders were still waiting. But now he saw the situation differently. This wasn't just about protecting Clara from her stepfather. This was about keeping her away from a man who'd already thrown her away once and now wanted to claim her for his own twisted purposes. There's more, Clara said quietly. Blackwood doesn't know William has been hurting me. If he finds out, he'll kill William. But then he'll still take me. Daniel turned back to her. And you'd rather die than go with either of them. Wouldn't you? The question hung in the air between them. Daniel thought about his own father, about the beatings, the hunger, the constant fear. He'd run away at 17 and spent 20 years building a life where no one could hurt him. Now he was faced with a choice that would destroy that safety forever. Clara, he said slowly, there's something you should know about me. About why I understand what you're going through. She looked up at him, waiting. My father sold me to a man named Harrison when I was 15. Said I was payment for a gambling debt. I spent 2 years as that man's slave before I found the courage to run. Clara's eyes widened. She'd been looking for someone who understood, and she'd found him. The scars on my back, Daniel continued, they're from Harrison's whip. The reason I've lived alone for 20 years is because I swore no one would ever have power over me again. Outside, one of the riders shouted, "Time's almost up, cross." Daniel looked at Clara, seeing his own past reflected in her terrified eyes. He'd spent 2 decades running from men like Blackwood and Harrison and William Tucker. But Clara couldn't run. She was 16, alone, and had nowhere to go. "What are you thinking?" she whispered. Daniel picked up his rifle and checked the ammunition. "I'm thinking it's time I stopped running." Daniel stepped back onto his porch, rifle ready. The hour had expired, and the 3 riders were already moving closer, their horses' hooves thundering against the packed earth. "Time's up, cross," William Tucker called out. "Hand over the girl and we'll ride out peaceful." "Cannot do that," Daniel replied, his voice carrying across the distance between them. The lead gunman, a lean man with dead eyes, nudged his horse forward. "Then you've chosen poorly." But before anyone could draw weapons, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the ridge behind Daniel's cabin. More riders, at least 6 of them, moving fast toward the confrontation. William Tucker's face went white. He wasn't supposed to come himself. Daniel felt his blood chill as he recognized the man leading the new group. Vincent Blackwood rode like a king surveying his domain, flanked by armed men who'd earned their reputation with blood. Blackwood was older than Daniel had expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the Wyoming wilderness. As the confrontation escalated, Clara made her escape through the cabin's rear window, leading to a final battle that would test Daniel's resolve and force Blackwood to confront the truth about his own cruelty. In the end, it was William Tucker's own violence that sealed his fate, and Blackwood's unexpected moment of paternal recognition that gave Clara and Daniel their chance at freedom. They rode toward Colorado at sunset, leaving behind the Wyoming plains and the ghosts of their past, carrying with them the hope that sometimes, even the most broken souls can find redemption in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The frontier had tested them both, but in choosing to fight rather than flee, they had discovered something more valuable than safety. They had found each other, and in doing so, had found themselves.